Here's the track I'll be taking you through. Explore all other sounds in this project and many more in the Gesaffelstein sample library, available on Samples by Vanity. Let's start with the synthesizers. Here's how they sound. In this composition, I've incorporated melodies from 2 tracks by Gesaffelstein, Pursuit and Obsession. The first 16 bars features the melody from Pursuit, followed by the melody from Obsession. For the final 16 bars, I've composed an original melody heavily inspired by the previous 2 tracks. Loop 10 from the sample library if you're interested. I chose to recreate these melodies to demonstrate their similarities and to provide a clear example of what to aim for when trying to achieve a similar sound. Each melody is built around 2 sections of 16th notes, one playing a bass and the other playing a higher riff. Each section has a single repeating note that forms the foundation of the pattern, with a scattering of alternate notes thrown in to add variation. Both my original melody and the melody from Pursuit adhere closely to this formula, showcasing the characteristic elements of the Dark Prince's formula. In Obsession, Gesaffelstein builds out this formula by utilizing various note lengths to add interest, preventing it from sounding like a repeating arpeggiator. As for the note choice, I created several synth loops for the sample library and found that an octave split works well, with accent notes a half step above the top riff. This choice of half step allows us to leverage the dissonance produced by the interval between them. This dissonant quality tends to evoke a darker and more tense atmosphere in music, often employed to evoke feelings of tension or unease. Upon listening to Gesaffelstein's music while preparing for this tutorial, the distinctive warmth of analog synthesizers became immediately apparent. It reminded me of Justice and early Daft Punk tracks. To recreate this sound, I opted for Arteria's emulation of the Prophet synthesizer and Vital, a free synthesizer accessible to everyone. While Vital handles the majority of the synthesis work, the Prophet contributes a warm, square wave-like fatness to the sound. Additionally, I've resampled this Prophet patch into an Ableton sampler included in the library. Here's how the Vital patch sounds. I've combined a basic shape wavetable with a pulse width wavetable, complemented by a sine wave, pitched down an octave for the bass foundation. To introduce additional textures and character, I included a white noise sample in the sample oscillator, adding a gritty element to the sound. It's worth noting that Gesaffelstein's preference for analog gear, like the Korg MS-20, Roland Juno 106, and the SH-101, indicates a reliance on simple waveforms, such as the square, saw, and pulse width. This suggests that achieving his signature sound doesn't necessarily require complex wavetables, but rather emphasizes the manipulation of fundamental wavetables to craft compelling textures. Let's recreate this patch from an initialized version of Vital, and as Vital is free, anyone can follow along with this. In Oscillator 1, choose the Basic Waves wavetable. Opt for format scale and adjust it to approximately 20%. Increase the width of the sound by setting the voices to 6 and slightly reduce the detune to around 4%. Then adjust the morph on the wavetable until it looks like mine. Feel free to change any of these values to taste. For oscillator 2, we'll leave it on the sine wave, but pitch it down an octave and lower its volume. This is for our low end of the patch. In oscillator 3, choose the pulse width wavetable and reduce it to around the same level of the sine wave. We can also adjust the unison settings to control the width. Enable the sample oscillator for white noise and decrease its volume level. All of these oscillators now feature basic waveforms similar to those Gesaffelstein would use for his synths. The filter is employed to reduce some of the high frequency fuzziness. I used an analog 24 decibel slope set to around this cutoff. The plucky quality of the sound is achieved using an envelope. I'm using envelope 2, which modulates the cutoff frequency of the filter in the effects tab. You can adjust the decay, sustain and modulation amount to customize the sound to your preference. The final additions are all of the effects. The chorus, phaser and flanger effects give the sound its fuzzy character and stereo width. The final two effects are just to taste, adding more crunch and bite to the sound. Subsequently, I've applied an EQ to accentuate the high frequencies while attenuating the low end, as the sub-bass frequencies will be handled separately. The Prophet sound is intentionally kept simple, utilizing the Impro Read preset found in the leads category. If I adjust the frequencies of oscillator A, you'll notice that it resembles an acid bass lead pitched down for added depth and richness. The sound produced by these two square waves in the Prophet differs significantly from those in, for example, Vital, due to the distinct characteristics of each device. For a more authentic analog sound, relying solely on vintage synth emulations would bring you closer to the desired result. However, I understand that not everyone has access to these instruments. An alternative approach is to download audio files sampled by online strangers and import them into a sampler, allowing you to create your own budget-friendly emulation. The processing rack serves as the key component for achieving the desired sound. I designed it to emulate the characteristics of analog equipment by visualizing the signal chain and each component within it that contributes to shaping the sound. The analog warmth or coloration we're after is primarily achieved through saturation, which involves a combination of distortion and compression. Distortion in this context introduces both harmonic and inharmonic overtones to the sound, resulting in a thicker and richer texture. Meanwhile, compression is applied with a fast attack and release, subtly reducing the dynamic range in a manner that is pleasing to the ears. Together, these elements work symbiotically to enhance the depth and character of the sound, replicating the warmth and coloration we associate with analog equipment. I've developed two versions of this processing rack, one utilizing Ableton's stock devices and another incorporating third-party plugins. Here's the stock chain. We've got 3 saturation options with a macro control for each for their dry-wet values. Next are flutter and wow using the chorus ensemble device, a glue compressor with soft clip enabled, and both tape hiss and noise via the erosion plugin. Here's an A/B of the rack on the Prophet synth. The third-party version doesn't necessarily sound better, but is an option for non-Ableton users. The principles that we discussed earlier apply here. I'm just using different saturation plugins for different tones. Soft Clipper, Saturation, and Analog Synth Filter Emulation, which is a very cheap plugin but sounds great, Tape Emulation, Glue Compression, more saturation from Soundtoys, and the RC20 for the wow and flutter. Both chains back to back. I actually prefer the Ableton version, which demonstrates the power of the stock plugins. You can download this rack for free, linked in the description. If you choose to make your own version, just remember to right-click and change the saturation plugins to high quality mode. In both versions of the processing chain, a crucial step is clipping the signal. This involves using a soft clipper that effectively trims the peaks of the signal at a predefined threshold. The term soft preceding the word clipper denotes the sharpness of the cut, with soft clipping producing a smoother result, more akin to the analog sound. I've integrated this soft clipping technique for its ability to impart coloration to the signal and introduce controlled distortion. Following the racks, there's a stereo imager, EQ, and a sidechain to the kick drum. My immediate thought for the drums was vintage drum machines. To capture this essence, I crafted a collection of drum sounds in the sample library, aiming to emulate the classic vibe of machines like the Roland 909, while infusing them with a modern punch to ensure they stand out in contemporary productions. Here's how they sound. I noticed that Gesaffelstein's kick drums often possess a significant amount of top-end presence, likely to help them cut through the mix effectively. To achieve a similar sound, I've utilized an EQ to emphasize the higher frequencies in the kick, enhancing its clarity and impact within the track. Gesaffelstein's snare drums normally exhibit a pronounced splash around the 1 kHz region, accompanied by a stereo spread to create space and separation against the synth lines. The only processing is this drum bus, which has become a staple on my bus processing. The initial percussion sound is a clicker sample that I threw into Simpler, utilizing its transient chopping feature. This allows me to segment the sample based on the transients, which I then use to create a rhythmic pattern set to a 16th note grid. To introduce variation and maintain interest, I sprinkled in some 32 notes within the pattern toward the end of the bar. This technique adds dynamic texture to the percussion arrangement, enhancing the overall groove and rhythmic complexity of the track. While clicking percussion sounds aren't something I heard in Gesaffelstein's music, he does incorporate a variety of shuffle percussion elements between the kick and the snare hits. In a 4-on-the-floor beat, it's vital for percussion elements to infuse groove and movement, making the rhythm as interesting as possible within the confines of the on-the-grid kick and snare. Moving on to the final element in the drums, the hats. I've got two versions, one pan left, one pan right, while ensuring they are balanced in volume level. To maintain synchronization and cohesion with the rhythm section, I've copied across the same MIDI pattern from the clicker sound, allowing all the elements to play in perfect harmony. Then all of the percussion together. On the group processing of the drum bus, I've got Spiff, which is a transient shaper that allows you to cut and boost transients based on frequency area. I'm following that up with the glue compressor with a long attack time to allow the transients through and the shortest release time possible to bring out the tails of the sounds. Here's an AB. The last touch I added was some tape noise and vinyl crackle, aiming to enhance the analog feel of this track. These samples serve to introduce a layer of imperfection that counteracts the pristine quality of digital production. The constant hum of tape hiss can even function as white noise, adding depth and richness to the overall mix, ultimately contributing to a more textured and immersive listening experience. I added an EQ to draw out more of the higher crackling tones, and a stereo imager that combines with Shaperbox to move these samples from mono into a wide stereo spread across every 8 bars. This just adds some slight movement and stereo interest to these elements. I hope that this tutorial will aid you in creating tracks influenced by Gesaffelstein and infuse your own works with some of his distinctive magic. Thank you for your viewership, attention and support. Until next time.